Well, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everyone. I hope everyone is enjoying. If they have some time off or time to spend with family, I hope they're getting to take advantage of it. As I record this, it is Christmas Eve, and always a tradition in my household growing up around that time was to open up stockings, and they were always filled with packs of trading cards from my various favorite sports, whether it's basketball, baseball, or my childhood favorite sport of all, which was hockey. Despite growing up in Atlanta, where we seldom had ice or any kind of snow that wouldn't paralyze the city if maybe a half inch fell. So I thought a fun idea for a little video post on Christmas Eve / Christmas would be to open up some old packs of trading cards and do a little of one of my favorite things they used to do at Deadspin, which was remembering some guys. I will try to remember some guys from a combination of 1991 Topps Stadium Club and 1990 Score NHL Hockey. These were, I'm not sure if they were formative sets for me, but they are of the era, and I had them because I bought them from a card shop sometime in the last year. Just randomly decided to hang on to them, and now seemed like a great time to open them and start remembering some guys. So we're going to do that right now. I'm going to put this mic down, and we're going to tear into some packs of extremely old, depressingly old trading cards. Gonna give you the nice ASMR effect as well from opening up the cards, because I know that's what everyone likes out of these types of videos. So who do we have here? We've got Doug Crossman, a defenseman, I want to say, yes, for the Islanders. Not particularly memorable in terms of a player. They say that he was praised for his ability to quarterback the offense, kill penalties, and his knack for connecting on headman passes. So that's good for you, Doug. You you did that. Let's look up where Doug Crossman is now. I think we can do that for some of these as well. So Doug Crossman, most recently, did he coach? No, but he was on the Canadian national team for the 1987 Canada Cup, which was one of the most, I think, famous Canada Cups in history. They used to have competition between Canada and the Soviet Union. That was kind of a precursor to the World Cup, or what's coming up soon, the Four Nations face-off. So Doug Crossman, long history of being in that. You're a keeper. We also have Bobby Smith of the Canadiens, who is apparently an alternate captain for the Canadiens. They say that he was a member of the 1986 Canadiens championship squad, which is pretty good. And as always, we're going to look up Bobby Smith, see what he's been up to. And they say that, let's see, he was formerly the majority owner of the Halifax Mooseheads in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, the QMJHL. And he was the GM of the Coyotes. Yes, that's right. Right after they moved from Winnipeg to Phoenix, the late, maybe not lamented, RIP nonetheless, Phoenix / Arizona Coyotes. He was their GM in the late 90s. So let's keep going. Oh, we got Bill Ranford. Bill Ranford was a goalie who was Grant Fuhr's backup for the Edmonton Oilers for, throughout the 80s, basically. And didn't really have a huge opportunity to start for some of those years. But he got thrust into action in 1990. This was the post-Gretzky era for Edmonton. And not only filled in well, but actually was fantastic and ended up winning the Conn Smythe Trophy as the best player, most valuable player of the playoffs, as the Oilers won the Stanley Cup in 1990 without Wayne Gretzky. Kind of a not addition by subtraction, of course, but one of those weird cases where a team continued to win despite losing the greatest player of all time. And some of that was, I like the fact that Bill Ranford, he was 5'10", and that was back in the days in which 5'10" goalies could thrive in the league. That was what they wanted, was having guys that had quickness and agility, not necessarily just pure size to stand in front. And I think there might be only like one starting goalie. I think Juicy Saros of the Predators might be the only starting goalie under 6 feet tall, just to give a sense of how the game has changed. And Saros is he's 5'11", so another just sign in which the evolution of hockey has happened. But shout out to you, Bill Ranford. We also have Fredrik Olausson, a defenseman. This was probably very early in his career. They called him a key member of a Jets defense that slashed its goals against total by 65 in 1990. He was a first-round pick of the Jets in 1985, but I believe later on, Fredrik Olausson went on to play for the Mighty Ducks, yes, in various different seasons. Later in his career, he was on the Ducks with like Correa and Solani in the late 90s. And then he left them and he went to the 2002 Detroit Red Wings team that won the Cup over Carolina, and one of the best teams of all time. He was on that team, played 47 games, and then returned the following season to the Mighty Ducks, and then went to the Cup final again and lost in 7 games to the Devils. But that was another great playoff run. Jean-Sébastien Giguère was the goalie for the Mighty Ducks that year. But Fredrik Olausson played a role in that team. So a long career for him, for a guy that started out his career with the original iteration of the Winnipeg Jets, played there 8 seasons, and then ended up bouncing around later in his career before he retired in the early to mid 2000s. So good for him. We have a 1990 NHL prospect card for Eric Weinrich. They say he's with the Devils in this particular card. I seem to remember he was with Chicago at some point in the 90s. And then another guy that played forever made his debut in 1989 and didn't retire until after the 2006 season. So 17 years in the NHL with 8 different teams. Pretty cool to be able to have that level of a career over time. And they said he worked as a professional scout. I'm getting this from Wikipedia, trusted source. He worked as a professional scout for the Sabres, and now he's a development coach for the Devils. So, who better to learn from than someone that played that long in the NHL? We have Murray Barron also as well. A lot of prospects in this. Murray Barron, I don't necessarily have a lot of strong memories of him. Murray Barron, he again played 15 years in the NHL though, so good predictor of long-term success for some of these cards to be included in this group. Don't necessarily have a whole lot to say about you, Murray. We have Rick Corriveau, another prospect from 1990. And how long did he play? Because I don't really have a huge memory of Rick Corriveau. He may have not played in the NHL. If Hockey Reference is not deceiving me, it appears that Rick Corriveau never actually played in the NHL. So take back what I said a second ago about the staying power and predictiveness of these cards that they would provide. Maybe it's a sign he doesn't have a jersey on in this card, like a team logo or anything like that. So maybe that was it. He played in the ECHL for the Toledo Storm and apparently won 2 championships with them, according to the wonderful HockeyDB.com. I wouldn't say competitor to Hockey Reference, a compliment to Hockey Reference. Well, we also have Francois Leroux, another prospect from that same class. He played for 10 years in the NHL. Don't necessarily have a huge amount of things to say about him. Apparently he switched positions, which is kind of cool. After playing 9 years as a defenseman for the Oilers, the Senators, and the Penguins, he then, for his final year in 1998, went to the Colorado Avalanche and played 50 games as a left wing, according to Hockey Reference. So, had to be pretty good to be able to do that, despite the fact that he had played so long as a defenseman. We have Brian Benning of the LA Kings, a teammate at that time of Wayne Gretzky. They say he underwent an emergency appendectomy on March 6th, but was back on the ice after missing only 9 games. This was in 1990. So good for him. That is hockey. That really tells you all you need to know about what it is to be a hockey player. You get that appendix popped out and just get right back out there. So Benning now, they don't say anything about his post career, but two of his sons, Matt Benning and Mike Benning, played in the NHL, and he is the younger brother of former Vancouver Canucks GM Jim Benning and of former NCAA player Mark Benning. So the Benning family is just populated throughout the hockey world. They're all from Edmonton. They grew up, really immersed in it. And Brian Benning was born in 1966 in Edmonton. So really coming of age in his mid-teens, right when the Oilers were sort of taking off, joined the NHL, had Wayne Gretzky. And so that probably pretty formative for the Benning family. We have Don Maloney. I gotta say, not a lot of stars in this pack. Not as many as I was hoping for to do this type of video, but we're pushing forward anyway, and talking about various different players who maybe you didn't know. We're remembering some guys. That's the point. What we're doing here. So with Don Maloney, not necessarily a incredibly distinguished career. He played a good amount of years in the NHL, mostly with the New York Rangers. And he and his brother Dave Maloney, another kind of family type of situation. He was an all-star a couple of years with the Rangers, so I don't want to downplay his contributions. But then after his career, he became the general manager of the New York Islanders during the time in which they transitioned to the ill-fated fish sticks uniforms. Then he was with the Rangers and was an assistant GM, VP of player personnel, and so forth for over a decade. Went to the Phoenix Coyotes, probably around the time Wayne Gretzky was coaching there, maybe. He was named GM of the Year. He was the first ever recipient of the General Manager of the Year award, which is, I guess in 2010, they had not yet introduced that award, which is kind of interesting. But he lasted with them as GM until 2016, became a scout for the Flames, president of hockey operations for them, and then was succeeded in that role by Craig Conroy. Now that's a guy we could remember, but that's for another video. So Don Maloney, shout out to Don Maloney. We have Pelle Eklund. Pelle Eklund of the Flyers, with great hands and vision of the entire ice surface, make him a valuable Flyer playmaker. So he can see only the surface, though. He can't see above the surface. He really only can see like maybe just at the ice, and probably of limited use, I think. But anyway, so he played for the Flyers for majority of his career, 9 years. Finished up as a Dallas Star for 5 games at the tail end of things in 1993/94. Swedish player, was a Lady Byng, perennial Lady Byng candidate for most gentlemanly player. Not a whole lot else to say about Pelle Eklund. We have Bob Kudelski of the LA Kings. I remember in NHL 94, I believe he was still on the Kings, and you could play with him if you were playing with Gretzky. He was traded midway through that season, but I guess he was still on the rosters for them, because I do remember playing with him in that game. A lot of my memory of hockey players from this era do come from that particular time and place. So Bob Kudelski, there you go. Now here's a good one. This is a Hockey Hall of Famer and one of the best offensive defensemen of all time. We've got Phil Housley. Shout out to Phil. Phil was a great puck-moving defenseman. He was very talented as a passer, skater, scorer. Maybe not the best defensive player, but that's what you got out of that era, especially for a guy that played at the height of the high-flying 80s and was really probably like he was part of a class of players that were sort of like Bobby Orr light, where obviously no one was as good as Bobby Orr, but you had like a Phil Housley or a Paul Coffey, these guys that were really good skaters and offensive threats from the back line that you didn't really have in the game until Bobby Orr came along. But then surely many of these players were influenced by watching Bobby Orr do what he did growing up, and they emulated that, and Phil Housley was one of the best ones. He's still the second leading scorer among American-born players. He had the record, but he was passed by Mike Modano. I will link in the description of this video, or the post of this video, the post that I wrote about Mike Modano, one of, if not my number one all-time favorite player in hockey, and so any chance to get to talk about him. And, sorry to Phil Housley, but records are made to be broken. But anyway, yeah, Phil Housley, another thing that I liked about him, or just thought was interesting, was he was a guy that bounced around a lot for a Hall of Famer, and a guy that was just, so prolific. He played for the Sabres, then the Jets, then the Blues, the Flames, the Devils, the Capitals, the Flames again in the late 90s, the Blackhawks. I remember him late career going to the Blackhawks, and finally finished up with the Toronto Maple Leafs one game in 2003. But 21 years in the NHL and kind of spanned every possible era from the high-flying 80s, the dead puck 90s, and then toward approaching the lockout of the mid-2000s. So good for him. He plays hard but clean, so says the back of his card. Now here's Kirk Muller. Kirk Muller is also an interesting guy. He in this card, he is wearing the C as captain of the Devils, and he was known for being kind of a gritty leadership type guy with that Devils team. We think of Scott Stevens as being sort of the ultimate Devils captain, but this was before Scott Stevens got to the Devils. The Devils were gradually growing from being what Wayne Gretzky had called a Mickey Mouse franchise early on to actually becoming something more, and eventually a champion in the 90s and the 2000s. So Kirk Muller, but then he went to the Montreal Canadiens. They won the Cup in 1993, and he was a key part of that and had a number of goals. That team thrived in overtime in the 93 playoffs, and he was a guy that contributed a number of those goals. And I mentioned the New York Islanders fish sticks uniforms with the fisherman guy, Gorton's fisherman looking guy on the jerseys. Widely ridiculed. I kind of like them. Don't tell anyone. But as part of that rebrand, the Islanders wanted someone who was like a gritty leader, clubhouse guy. They really felt like they had, young players. Ziggy Palffy was one of them. What a great player. Great name. And a great player, honestly. So they wanted to go out and get someone who was like a locker room guy to be able to coach up and be a presence for that team as they were coming up. And so Kirk Muller was a guy that they targeted. They went and they traded for him. And he, I think at first, didn't want to report to the team. Then just kind of tanked his performance. He just showed up and was like, it's a little like the the interview, the Marshawn Lynch interview. I'm only here because I don't want to get fined. That was sort of like Kirk Muller being with the Islanders after he arrived. He was like, I don't want to be here, and I'm just gonna kind of go through the motion of being here, but I'm not really excited about it. And so he ended up only playing 27 games, 12 in 1995, and then another 15 the following season as an Islander before going to Toronto afterward. And it was very strange because he ended up, you'd think that might be like, okay, well, that's a bad sign for someone's career. Like, middle of their career, their former captain played, for a key role for a champion in Montreal, and then they come and they just totally don't care at all. But he bounced around a few places and then ended up playing the last 4 years of his career with Dallas as they were sort of the defending Stanley Cup champs starting in 2000, and they went back to the finals that year. And that Dallas team was a veteran team and was competing at that time. So it's just very strange that you could have a guy who in the middle of his career, early in his career, middle of his career, had attitude of, being a glue guy and a leader on a team, goes to the Islanders. I mean, you're playing in New York, it's Long Island, but you'd think, oh, I can embrace this opportunity. Totally doesn't care, plays his way off the team, and then comes back and is back in sort of that veteran journeyman type of leader type of role. So Kirk Muller, kind of an odd career arc. Finally, we've got Craig Ludwig. Another, I mentioned that I liked the 90s Dallas Stars with Mike Modano. Craig Ludwig, very important part of that team as well. Ludwig was, nowadays everybody blocks shots. It's part of the job description no matter who you are, but that wasn't as much of a part of the game back then. And Craig Ludwig was one of the players that really specialized in blocking shots. We don't actually have shot blocking stats for the majority of his career, which is sad, because I think he would probably be the all-time leader. Like, I don't necessarily know if that's true or not, but if we did have those stats, I think he may not have any blocked shot stats if I'm looking at Hockey Reference on his page, and if so, that's a tragedy. But he had massive shin guards and pads that he would use to try to block as many shots as possible. So that is Craig Ludwig, and that was our pack of 1990 score NHL hockey cards. So the 1990 season, well represented. Some interesting names in there. We even had a Hall of Famer in there in Phil Housley. Now we're going to open up the 1991 Stadium Club cards. Give you a little more of the ASMR effect here. Now these are cool cards, and the way in which they're cool, first of all, some of these are kind of stuck together. It's kind of an interesting, like, we have to kind of pry them apart from each other, which, gosh, I sure hope this doesn't destroy the inherent value, resale value of these cards from the 1990s era overinflated card production boom. That would be a real shame if these ended up seeing their value tanked because of this. But also, one of the cool things about these cards, as I struggle to pry them apart from each other, but this is probably that noise is painting people that collect these things as they hear the adhesing of these cards to each other. It's so bizarre. But one of the cool things about these Stadium Club cards in every different sport was that they had these Sporting News. They were sponsored by the Sporting News, which I thought was very cool. Sporting News was the Bible. They even, I think, called it that at one point, but it was the Bible of sports data, stats. You'd pick it up like during the summer in baseball. You'd get like a full rundown of the stats for every player on every team all throughout the season. I think it came out weekly, and so you could just go through and kind of track the stats that way. So I remember getting that a lot when I was a kid. And it just was cool to have like branding of a different magazine on your hockey card. So anyway, we were looking at Andre Racio. I honestly never know how to pronounce this guy's name, but he was in NHL 93 as well, which I remember the name from for sure. His nickname was Red Light. As a goalie, not a good thing for that to be your nickname. He played 5 years in the NHL and was not particularly successful. His save percentage, 7% worse than the league average. He had 3.5 goals against average. Fine goalie, I guess, but he was Patrick Waugh's backup in those years. So, he was not competing with Patrick Waugh for the starting job anytime soon. But they did say he beat out two other rookies, J.C. Bergeron and Frederic Chabot, to earn the lion's share of the backup goalie work in Montreal. They call him slightly built. He's 5'11". That was actually taller than some of the other goalie, Bill Ranford, that we saw earlier. So he shared the American Hockey League's Hap Holmes Award with Bergeron for the best goals against average at Sherbrooke in 1990. But he didn't really last that long in the NHL as a goalie. Now, this is a pretty good player. We got Kevin Stevens. Kevin Stevens on the Penguins with Mario Lemieux, another of my childhood favorite players. So anybody that was on those Pittsburgh teams that scored a lot of goals was an exciting player for me to see in a card pack like this. Seeing Kevin Stevens, I would have been like, oh, this is awesome. I know him. I played with him in NHL 93, NHL 94, all that. When I talk about the NHL series, by the way, a lot of people played this on the Sega Genesis. I think that was probably the best version of it on the consoles, or they played it on the Super Nintendo. But my introduction to it was actually on the PC, on DOS. They just called it NHL Hockey. It was a port of NHL, I guess maybe NHL 94, but it had the NHL, the 93 season stats. So to me, I played that game so many hours. I mean, it might be one of the games in my life I've played the most hours of overall in total. And so the 1993 season, which later I came to learn was one of the most iconic seasons in hockey history. Last time that a Canadian team won the Stanley Cup. Also, just tons of iconic players. You had Gretzky going to the final. All those things, that it was known as one of the most acclaimed seasons in the history of hockey. I didn't know any of that. Again, didn't really watch a whole lot of hockey, honestly. Didn't have a chance to until the Fox contract came through in 1995. And I got to discover the joys of a glowing puck and robots and all kinds of things like that. But before that, I just knew it through the video game. I was like, this is awesome. This is a fun sport. It's very fast. It's very exciting. And it's fun to play out on rollerblades, as I did at that time. But then you play it in the game and you're like, wow, this I know these guys as little pixelated avatars. That was Kevin Stevens for me, but I mean, he was a really good scorer in the NHL as well at different times. He had 54 goals in 1992. He had 55 in 93. Both of those playing with Mario Lemieux. The 93 Penguins were ridiculous team. One of the best offensive teams in the history of the NHL. They did not win the Stanley Cup. They were upset in 7 games by the Islanders in the second round of the playoffs, but they were a powerhouse throughout that season. And to close the regular season, they did not lose for their last 17 games of the season or something like that, or 18 games. So they were a great team, and that was probably the best season of Kevin Stevens' career. He had 111 points that season. I guess the year before he had 123, but 1 fewer goal, so you could quibble with that. Later on, just kind of bounced around, went to the Rangers at one point, went back to the Penguins, but this is peak Kevin Stevens right here. We got Neil Broughton, another Neil. He spells it wrong. He spells it Neal. Apologies to all the Neils that spell it with an A out there. But Neil Broughton was like Mr. Minnesota, and he was on the North Stars, but he's from Minnesota. He was on Team USA. I believe he was on the 1980 Miracle on Ice team. I'm going to quick fact check myself on this. But kind of an iconic player, and he played for Herb Brooks with the Minnesota, like University of Minnesota team as well. So yeah, he was a member of the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team. So kind of like Mr. U.S. Hockey, which means being in that Minnesota system, especially at that time. And his brothers Aaron and Paul Broughton also played in the NHL. So he was a good player. It's kind of interesting how we remember that team. We don't necessarily remember standout players from that. But Neil Broughton had 105 points in 1986. He was sort of the Minnesota North Stars guy before Mike Modano came along, and then they played together for a few seasons. He was there when they moved to Dallas, and then he went to the Devils. They won the Cup in 1995. He was on that team, and just played out, a few more seasons in his career with New Jersey, Dallas, so forth. But mainly think of him as a Minnesota North Star type of guy. And he had, so this is for Roseau High School in Minnesota. In his final season there, he had 120 points, 43 goals, 77 assists in 26 games. So this guy, he was scoring a lot in high school, and obviously had future NHL written all over him. Here's another player, Terry Yake. Don't have a huge amount of things to say about Terry Yake. They say he's a checking center with a chance to be a big-time goal scorer. I believe that he may have had a chance to do that at some point, but it did not totally manifest itself. He did have a couple of 20-goal seasons, one with Hartford. He was on the first Mighty Ducks team. That's kind of cool. He had 21 goals and 52 points for them. I remember him with the Blues at one point, but kind of a journeyman at that point, so not a whole lot to say. We got Paul Cyr as well. A handful of Hartford Whalers on in this card pack. Paul Cyr, I honestly don't remember him at all. This was one of his last seasons in the NHL when he was with Hartford. Previously had been with Buffalo. Just not a player that I think, because he was out of the league by 1993, he was not on my radar because he wasn't in the NHL hockey series. And here's kind of a tragic situation for him. So in 1987, this is while he was playing, he was shot in the stomach while vacationing in the Dominican Republic. He recovered. This is all from Wikipedia, by the way. His house burned down during his retirement, which he rebuilt himself. And then later he died of heart failure in 2012 at the young age of 48. So tragic character, Paul Cyr. Shout out to him for being in this card pack. Though we also have Jacques Cloutier. That is a great French-Canadian name, if I've ever heard one. Jacques Cloutier, goalie for the Quebec Nordiques at this point in his career. Earlier, it looks like he played for the Chicago Blackhawks. He just, kind of a less than fully star-studded career, although he did play, 255 games in the NHL. And then he became a goaltending coach for the Nordiques and was Patrick Waugh's goaltending coach for the Avalanche. And he won the cup with them in 96 and 2001. So pretty good post-playing career for Jacques Cloutier. Maybe not as good actual playing career. Now here is I love this type of stuff, by the way, which should not be surprising to anyone still listening to this. By the way, if you're still listening to this, thank you. Love you all. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays for all this. Hopefully this is fun, going back on these memory lane trips. But this has got like a little bit of a comic scene. I don't know if people can make out the words on this, but it's like conversation. You don't even know where to find the best hockey coverage. Oh, yeah? Well, it's on the back of this card. So what is on the back of this card? Well, it is a combination of an advertisement for the Sporting News. Again, they have this tie-in on the backs of these cards. And also the Sporting News Complete Hockey Book, which, by the way, if I had had that as a kid, I did not have that, didn't know it existed, would have just been all over it. It's the ultimate guide for hockey fans, 320 pages. If you're a Topps Club member, you can get it for $9.57. That is 40% off. And then, of course, you can get 72% off the cover price for for Sporting News, not the Hockey News. 28 issues, just 69 cents each. You can't beat that deal. So I'm kind of tempted. There's two different 800 numbers actually on here. I'm kind of tempted to call these numbers, see what happens. I'm not going to do that. Not going to subject people to that. The one thing I like on these types of cards, although they don't have it on this one, is like deals that expire on a particular date, and the date was like in 1991 or something, and just there's something kind of cool of seeing that, of back pretending that was actually a date in the future and that we're all young rather than being old as shit, and that date being 30-40 years ago. Here you go. So this is another one. I talked about Kevin Stevens earlier. He had some great hockey hair, but here is Rick Tocchet, who also has some great hockey hair. Look at that mane on Rick Tocchet. And Rick Tocchet and Kevin Stevens played together with the Penguins, and they were very kind of similar players. They were both power forward type guys. Were they actually traded for each other? They were actually traded for each other as well. In 1996, Kevin Stevens, the Kings and Bruins made a trade that sent Tocchet to the Bruins in exchange for Kevin Stevens. Fascinating career for him as well, because he was another type of kind of rugged forward that played with great players, played with Mario Lemieux and Wayne Gretzky in LA in 95, and played a ton of years in the NHL, played 18 seasons, and just fell short of 500 goals. Now here's the question, is who was better between Rick Tocchet and Kevin Stevens in terms of their careers? Because again, I think of them as being kind of equivalent players over the course of their careers. But if you just look at the top line numbers and compare the two of them, Rick Tocchet, more goals. He has him beat 440 to 329. He also has more points, 952 to 726. He has a better plus minus. Rick Tocchet plus 84. Kevin Stevens was a minus 103. Both guys had a fair number of penalty minutes, but Rick Tocchet had almost 3,000 in his career. He was truly a power forward at that time. Good for both of those guys. But and Rick Tocchet afterward, after his career ended, he became a coach and is now currently the coach of the Vancouver Canucks. But he also was coached the Arizona Coyotes when Gretzky was, I think he was an assistant coach under Gretzky with them. He coached the Tampa Bay Lightning as well. He replaced Barry Melrose, great TV analyst. Shout out to him. Rick Tocchet, and he replaced Bruce Boudreau, who has also done TV. So there's like kind of combinations of that pipeline from TV to coaching. He was an assistant with the Penguins when they won the Cup in 2016 and 2017. So he kind of came back to Pittsburgh after playing there and then became a coach. And I think he was involved heavily in the infamous gambling incident with Wayne Gretzky and Wayne Gretzky's wife Janet and Rick Tocchet and the Arizona Coyotes. Kind of a forgotten scandal most of the time. The great one is scot-free and clean as a whistle in terms of his reputation. We don't really talk that much about this situation with the gambling scandal, but I think I'll let everyone Google that and look up the particulars of that. That is beyond the scope of this video, but Rick Tocchet, great hair, great career, some interesting twists and turns in this. Now, here we have Ken Linseman during his time with the Oilers, but his nickname was Kenny the Rat Linseman, and I think that's one of the best nicknames of any athlete ever. So, shout out to him for that. He was on the Oilers pretty early in the Gretzky era. He also was on the Bruins. He was a two-way center. They say he is a pesky kind of center, frustrating to play against. He draws a lot of penalties, and he will go into the corners and battle with anyone. He almost had 2,000 career penalty minutes in his career. So shout out to Kenny the Rat Linseman in his time. One of the great nicknames of all time for him. And then we will move on to Randy Gillen. Can't say that I know a whole lot about Randy Gillen during his career. We can look up things about him because we do have access to the internet, which is a blessing that you didn't have when you had these cards growing up. All the information that you had was on the back of these cards, so you would not have known that because they only list one season in 1991. You would not have known that Randy Gillen had 5 goals and a -24 plus minus in 64 games with Winnipeg in 1989. So just important information being conveyed about Randy Gillen there. I don't have a whole lot to say about Randy Gillen. The thing here is sometimes you have to kind of jog your memory and remember, like, was there anything outside of their playing career? Not so in the case of Randy. There's not really that much. Now we've got Craig Simpson. He was another player on the Oilers that we think of with that Gretzky, Messier type of era. Certainly not as acclaimed a member of that team, but he played for them for a handful of years. Yeah, for sure. He was on the Penguins at first, then was on the Oilers 88 through 93. So he won the Stanley Cup. I think 2 times during that time, and the kind of a guy that you think of as being a more sort of a depth player for those teams, but still a contributor to them. And of course now he is a TV analyst, and I think he did some of the hockey games as well for EA Sports back in the day. So Craig Simpson, a man of the 80s and 90s and beyond. We're almost done. Thanks for everyone sticking with me here. We got Mark Hunter. Again, not a whole lot that I know about Mark Hunter, honestly. And I was thinking we would know a little more about some of these guys from the 1 year later cards because it was like closer to the 90s, get some guys from there. But Mark Hunter, in his career, he scored 213 goals. He had a 44-goal season and was an all-star in 1986. It's pretty good, but don't necessarily have a huge amount of memory of him. And then finally we have Ron Wilson. Ron Wilson playing here for the St. Louis Blues. And Ron Wilson certainly had a career as a player, as we see right here, but I think of him as a coach. Hey everyone, Neil from the future here. Just a quick note that you're about to hear me talk about Ron Wilson, the coach, thinking that this was the same person as Ron Wilson, the player in this card. They are not the same person. Turns out there were two Ron Wilsons, both played. The guy in the card is not the coach, but we're just going to remember some guys in terms of this coach that's not actually the same guy in the card. I messed up. It's all good. Now back to the video. And in fact, he has coached all over the place. He was the, I believe, first coach of the Mighty Ducks. And he coached the Capitals to the Stanley Cup final in 1998, that team that they got swept in the finals by Detroit. But Peter Bondra, Adam Oates, we're remembering some guys. We remember guys from that team. He was with the Sharks during that time in which they were very competitive in the early to mid 2000s, pretty much most of the 2000s. And then he went to the Leafs, and he was there was like a famous story where Brian Burke gave him a contract extension, and then the team was just a disaster from that point onward. And Burke had to fire him after giving him the contract extension. I believe that was the last time that Ron Wilson coached in the NHL, was at that point. But that just, I think of the Leafs, I think of the vote of confidence of the contract extension, and then the complete collapse of that team almost immediately afterward. I think Brian Burke writes about that in his book about being a GM of an NHL team. I mean, Brian Burke has seen everything in his time as a GM, so certainly he would have that type of situation. But that's it. That's all we got. We got a pretty good haul of cards. If I were a child and I had opened these and it was 1992, I wasn't really as into hockey or knowledgeable about hockey at that time, but pretend I was, pretend you are. You get, this is a good amount of cards. You can put them in those binders. I would have binders of cards that were very filled, and I would just organize them by team sometimes. Then I'd decide one day to reorganize them by like how good I thought the players were, or maybe like the theme of the different players, like, great goal scorers or playmakers or whatever on another page. So it was endless fun in the days before we had social media and so many video games and all these other things to distract us, and incredibly long rambling videos on Substack to occupy our time. We had to have the cards, but just again, hopefully this was a little fun. If people like it, we can do it again sometime. There are no shortage of chances to get card packs from different stores or online, eBay, that type of thing. But just a joyous occasion to be able to be here and sit here on Christmas Eve, remembering some guys with my friends at Substack, and I'm hoping all of you have an incredible holiday and again get to really enjoy the season and enjoy all the different sports that are happening and the different ways that we can consume them. So I'll be back with more stories certainly in the next few weeks, and until then, I'll be seeing all of you real soon. Bye-bye.